Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. It had been an exhausting week at work, the kind where the clock's hands felt stuck, moving just to mock me with the persistence of tasks. Yet, despite the weariness, life had a certain comforting predictability. I was Mark, the steady hand in our home, husband to Lucy, father to two energetic children, and the man who prided himself on being unshakable, reliable. I led the IT department at a mid-sized firm, ensuring that crises were managed with calm precision. Lucy worked in the same company as a customer ambassador, whatever that really entailed. She was well-loved, full of vibrant energy, with laughter that seemed to brighten the most mundane moments. It felt good to share our work environment, to have lunch together, even if only on rare days when the workload allowed. Our life had carved itself into a comfortable routine. Weekdays passed in a blur of school drop-offs, work commutes, dinners eaten amid children's chatter about school and friends, and the quiet moments when the house settled into sleep. Weekends were ours, filled with laughter, games in the backyard, and the warmth of shared breakfasts. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, filled with memories stitched into each day like the hand-sewn patches of an old quilt. But one afternoon, as we wrapped up a meeting, Jack Edwards, the company's CEO, approached Lucy and me with a grin. Jack was the type who didn't just lead with authority but infused his speech with the charm of an old-school movie star. He leaned in, his voice a blend of excitement and conspiratorial glee. "I've got something special planned," Jack said, his eyes sparkling as he focused on Lucy. "William Fellows, you know, our top client, has invited a few of us for a long weekend on his private island. It's a token of appreciation, really, and I'd love for you both to join. Mark, your expertise is essential, and Lucy, well, William insisted on your presence. He's quite taken with your professionalism. A weekend on a private island." It sounded absurdly extravagant. I glanced at Lucy, who was beaming, her eyes glistening with the excitement of something different, something thrilling. She had spoken of William before in passing, usually with a tone that seemed touched by fascination. He was wealthy, enigmatic, and carried himself with an air that made others fall silent when he walked into a room. According to Lucy, his power didn't just come from his money, but from the way he wielded it, a quiet command that turned heads and piqued curiosities. Lucy squeezed my arm, breaking my train of thought. "Can you believe it?" she whispered. "It'll be a chance to unwind, Mark. We need this." The prospect of clear blue waters and an escape from the mundane was tempting. Still, an odd tension curled around the idea of seeing Lucy's eagerness when William's name was mentioned. I pushed it aside. Maybe it was nothing. After all, when had I ever doubted her? The next few days were a whirl of preparations. Lucy threw herself into packing, selecting clothes that I hadn't seen in years, dresses that seemed designed for luxury, not practicality. She hummed while folding delicate fabrics, eyes dancing in a way that hinted at something beyond anticipation. "Do you think this is too much?" she asked, holding up a red satin dress, the kind that looked as if it belonged at a gala. It clung to her figure in a way that made me pause. "No," I said, a smile forcing itself to my lips. "You'll look beautiful." The kids were dropped off with their grandparents, who promised them a weekend of treats and games. It felt like we were setting off on a second honeymoon, a break from the familiar that should have promised closeness. But as we drove to the airport, a silence stretched between us, filled not with anticipation but an unnameable tension. The private jet was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just luxurious, it was designed to remind you that you didn't belong unless you were someone like William Fellows. Crystal glasses sparkled under the soft glow of cabin lights, and the leather seats were buttery smooth. Lucy settled in next to me, her hand resting lightly on my thigh, but her gaze swept the cabin, as if searching for someone. I studied her profile as the engines roared to life. She was beautiful, of course, tall, with blonde hair that caught the light and blue eyes that shone with a mix of joy and nerves. But there was a distance in her expression, something I hadn't noticed before. Or perhaps I had and chose to ignore it. We landed on the island to the sight of white sands and gentle waves lapping at the shore. A line of staff awaited us, dressed impeccably, ready to cater to our every need. William stood at the forefront, a tall man with sharp features softened by an inviting smile. His gaze caught on Lucy, and for a second, the world seemed to pause. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and rich like aged whiskey. "I'm so pleased you both could join us." He extended his hand to me, a handshake that felt more like an assessment than a greeting. Then, turning to Lucy, he added, "I trust the trip was pleasant." Lucy's smile widened, her cheeks coloring slightly as she replied, "It was wonderful. Thank you for inviting us." The weekend unfolded like an impossible dream. Mornings began with leisurely breakfasts overlooking the sea, days were filled with activities tailored to the guests' every whim, and nights turned into lavish feasts. William moved through it all with an easy grace, a conductor in this symphony of indulgence. And Lucy followed, orbiting him with the polite interest of a guest mingling with a host, yet there were moments, those fleeting seconds, when their eyes met and lingered. Saturday evening arrived with a cool breeze and the promise of an elegant dinner. Lucy emerged from our room in that red satin dress, and the sight of her took my breath away. But before I could say anything, William appeared, nodding with approval. "You look stunning, Lucy," he said, voice low enough that it felt like a private compliment. I cleared my throat, stepping closer. "Shall we?" I asked, offering her my arm. She took it, but her touch was light, barely there. As we walked to dinner, the air felt charged with something unsaid, an invisible thread pulling us apart, taut and ready to snap. The night was filled with laughter and conversation, but I sat at the edge of it, watching Lucy, watching William, and feeling the first real stirrings of dread. The sea breeze that night carried with it a chill, the kind that didn't quite reach the skin but sank deeper, spreading discomfort from the inside out. Dinner on the veranda, overlooking the moonlit bay, was an opulent affair. Each plate was a work of art, each glass filled with the finest wine, but the flavors felt muted against the cacophony in my mind. Lucy sat across from me, engaged in conversation with William. His laughter, rich and knowing, resonated, reaching Lucy in a way that made her eyes sparkle. She glanced at me, catching my gaze before quickly looking away. I gripped my fork a bit too tightly, feeling the polished metal edge dig into my palm. "Mark, what do you think?" Jack, our CEO, asked, breaking into my thoughts. He had been discussing new strategies, hoping for my input, but I struggled to focus. "It sounds promising," I replied absently, offering him a practiced nod. My eyes drifted back to Lucy, who was now leaning forward, captivated by something William was saying. I told myself it was paranoia. But paranoia had a weight to it, and this felt heavier. More certain. After dinner, as conversations splintered into smaller groups, William invited us into his private office, a room that matched his reputation, mahogany bookshelves, art that spoke of both sophistication and old money. Lucy and I entered, with William gesturing for me to sit on a leather chair while he poured drinks. Lucy hovered by the window, gazing out at the water, her figure a silhouette against the glass. William handed her a glass of white wine and offered me a tumbler of amber whiskey. "I'm glad you could come," he said, sitting behind a desk that looked more like a throne than a workstation. "I hope you're both enjoying yourselves." "Absolutely," I said, taking a sip, the liquid burning its way down my throat. "This place is incredible." Lucy turned from the window, smiling faintly. "It's more than I could have imagined," she admitted. There it was again. That look between them, subtle but tangible. I wanted to shake my head, dismiss the thought, but it clung stubbornly. William's smile widened, a hint of satisfaction playing on his lips. The silence stretched a little too long. "So, Mark," William began, leaning forward, his hands folded neatly on the desk, "there's something I'd like to discuss. An opportunity that might interest you." I nodded, forcing my attention to him. He spoke of expanding our company's reach, partnering on a new project that could propel us into a different league. It was all logical, exciting even, but my focus waned, shifting back to Lucy, who seemed lost in thought. When we left the office, the sky was inked with stars. Lucy slipped her arm through mine, the contact startling in its lightness. "What did you think?" she asked, her voice soft. "About the project?" I echoed, trying to center myself. She nodded, but there was something distant in her gaze. "It sounds like a solid plan," I replied, glancing at her profile. "You seemed distracted, though." She laughed, but it was brittle. "I suppose I'm just overwhelmed. It's a lot to take in." We walked in silence for a while, past the pool that shimmered with reflections of palm fronds, to our room. As soon as we were inside, Lucy kicked off her heels and reached for her hair, letting the loose curls fall over her shoulders. She was beautiful, no question, and that thought twisted inside me, fueling the discomfort. "Are you okay?" she asked, meeting my eyes in the mirror as she washed off her makeup. "I am. Just a lot on my mind." I kept my tone casual. "Work?" she pressed, drying her face and turning to face me. There was a tension in her expression that matched mine, and for a second, it seemed like something might break open between us. But then, she smiled, a practiced smile, and crossed the room to kiss me, the scent of her perfume sharp and familiar. "Don't worry so much, Mark. This weekend is for us." Her touch lingered on my shoulder, and I wanted to believe her. Yet as she pulled away and busied herself with her phone, that sense of distance remained. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day unfolded under a bright sun that felt almost mocking in its brilliance. Lucy and I joined the other guests at breakfast, William appearing last, exuding confidence in a crisp white shirt. He made his way to Lucy, exchanging pleasantries before catching my eye. "Mark, I was hoping you'd join us for a quick meeting later. We can go over more details about the project," he said, his voice holding the authority of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Of course," I agreed, watching as he leaned in close to Lucy, whispering something that made her smile. A private joke, a shared moment. My chest tightened, and for the first time, I felt a flare of something deeper than suspicion, anger. After breakfast, William and I went to his study. He spoke at length about strategic partnerships, market trends, but my mind was elsewhere. Finally, he paused, fixing me with a curious look. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone dipped with genuine interest. "Yeah, fine," I lied, meeting his gaze. It was hard to tell if he believed me. We wrapped up the conversation, and I excused myself, needing air, space. As I stepped outside, the sun's glare made my eyes water, or maybe it was something else. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the chaos in my head. That's when I saw Lucy by the pool, sitting on a lounger, her phone in hand, a soft smile playing on her lips as she typed. Later that afternoon, while Lucy was away for a spa treatment arranged by William, I went back to our room. I had never been the kind to pry, to doubt, but today felt different. The thought of who she might be texting gnawed at me until I couldn't resist. Her phone was still on the dresser, half buried under a scarf. I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen lit up, and I took a breath, unlocking it with the passcode that I'd long known but never used this way before. Messages popped up, the usual chatter, friends, work, and then a string of exchanges with an unsaved number. My mouth went dry as I scrolled up, words jumping out, phrases about shared moments, hidden glances, laughter I hadn't been part of. Before I could read more, I heard footsteps approaching the door. I put the phone down hastily and turned to face the window as Lucy walked in, a towel wrapped around her shoulders, her skin flushed from the treatment. "Hey," she said, her smile warm. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. She didn't seem to notice. As she began to talk about her afternoon, I nodded, barely listening. The weekend's sheen had dulled, leaving only the raw edges of reality. I knew now what I had to do. The sun had set behind a horizon painted in deep purples and blues, and the evening air had a crispness that foretold something inevitable. The weekend was drawing to a close, yet it felt as if time had expanded, each moment stretched taut with the weight of uncertainty. I moved through the motions of mingling, of sipping a drink and offering polite nods as laughter spilled from groups around me. But inside, there was a simmering, restless energy. I knew tonight would be different. Lucy stood by the railing, looking out over the darkening water. The lights from the house cast a warm glow across her figure, highlighting the gold in her hair. She turned when she sensed me approaching, a smile lighting her face. "Mark, there you are," she said, her voice soft but tired. "I was starting to think you'd slipped away." "Just needed some air," I said, my eyes not quite meeting hers. I set my glass on the table and leaned against the railing, close but not touching her. The silence between us felt heavy, filled with the unspoken. I could feel her glancing at me, waiting for me to say something, anything. Finally, she reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "Is something bothering you?" Her tone was light, probing, as if she already knew the answer and was testing the waters. I exhaled slowly, turning to face her. "Why don't you tell me?" The words came out quieter than I intended but carried enough weight to make her blink, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "Tell you what?" she asked, but her eyes darted away, betraying the calmness in her voice. "I don't know, Lucy," I said, pushing off the railing and folding my arms. "Maybe why you've been so distracted. Or why you seem to have more to talk about with William than with me." Her face paled slightly, the moonlight casting her features into stark relief. "Mark, are you serious? William is our client. You're reading too much into this." "Am I?" I challenged, the edge in my voice sharper than I'd intended. She flinched, and for a moment, I felt a pang of regret. But it was smothered quickly by the memory of those messages, those hidden smiles. "Look," she began, taking a deep breath, "I won't stand here and let you accuse me of something without any reason. You're being paranoid." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Paranoid? Maybe. But it doesn't change what I saw, Lucy." Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. "What did you see?" I hesitated, the truth thick on my tongue. "Messages," I finally said, watching her reaction. The way her eyes widened for just a split second before she regained her composure spoke louder than any words. "Mark, you shouldn't be going through my phone," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "That's an invasion of my privacy." "Privacy?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Don't talk to me about privacy when I'm trying to understand why my wife is slipping away right in front of me." For a moment, there was only the sound of the sea brushing up against the shore, a gentle, repetitive shush that did nothing to calm the storm inside me. She wrapped her arms around herself as if shielding against a cold only she could feel. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then tell me what it is, Lucy. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look good." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, eyes flickering to the house behind us. The laughter inside felt distant, an echo from another world. "It was just, harmless," she said finally, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Harmless," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Those words on your phone, that smile when you looked at him, harmless doesn't quite fit, does it?" She turned away from me, hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It didn't mean anything. It was just attention, Mark. I was feeling. I don't know, unnoticed." "Unnoticed?" I felt a surge of anger that made my vision swim. "You think I haven't noticed? That I don't see how you light up when he walks in? That I haven't felt you pulling away?" Tears shone in her eyes, catching the moonlight. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "And how far is that, Lucy?" I demanded, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "It was just conversations, smiles, some stupid flirting," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. "Nothing physical, nothing that crossed a line." She turned to me, eyes pleading. "I swear, Mark. I never let it get that far." The silence that followed felt immense, as if the night itself had stopped to listen. My chest ached, each breath a struggle. I wanted to believe her, wanted so desperately for those words to be true. But trust was a fragile thing, and ours was already cracked. Before I could respond, the door to the veranda opened, and William stepped out, pausing when he saw us. His expression was neutral, but something flickered in his eyes as he took in our tense stances. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, a small smile playing at his lips. Lucy stiffened, stepping away from me, and that small movement was like a knife twisting deeper. "No," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "We were just talking." William's gaze shifted between us, lingering on Lucy for a second too long. "Well, don't let me stop you," he said, the smile turning almost condescending before he walked back inside. The moment passed, leaving us in the quiet that now felt suffocating. Lucy looked at me, eyes full of things unspoken, apologies that might never be enough. "Mark, please," she whispered. I took a step back, the distance between us feeling like miles. "We'll talk later," I said, my voice hollow. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing under the indifferent moon, the echo of our confrontation ringing in the space between us. The flight home was silent, punctuated only by the occasional drone of the engines and the rustle of papers as Jack read through work notes a few rows ahead. Lucy sat beside me, staring out the window, her expression fixed and unreadable. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing that coiled around every movement and breath. I had run through our confrontation 100 times since that night, the hurt in her voice, the desperation in mine, and the shadow that had fallen over everything since William stepped out onto the veranda. When we landed, the world seemed dimmer, as if the sun itself had taken on the dull, muted hues of doubt. We gathered our bags and nodded mechanically at colleagues as we made our way to the car. The ride home was a blur of traffic lights and asphalt, silence stretching across the small space between us like a chasm. The children were at my parents' house, waiting for us, oblivious to the silent unraveling happening just beneath the surface. Lucy went inside first, her posture rigid as she greeted them with a smile too practiced. I followed, feeling like a stranger in my own life. That evening, as the kids played upstairs, I found Lucy in the kitchen, staring into a half-empty glass of wine. The light over the sink cast her face in harsh relief, and for a moment, she looked as tired as I felt. "We need to talk," I said, breaking the fragile quiet. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, and nodded. We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where we'd laughed over spilled cereal and planned vacations. Now it was a battlefield, holding only silence and the echoes of what we were losing. "I need to know the truth, Lucy," I said finally. "All of it." She flinched as if the words were a blow. "I told you the truth," she whispered. "It was never more than a mistake, Mark. I got caught up in something, in feeling noticed for a change." "Noticed?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "I noticed you, Lucy. I loved you. Maybe I wasn't good at showing it, but I did." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she said, voice cracking. "And I was wrong. I was so wrong." I wanted to believe her, to take those words and patch them over the cracks in my heart, but I couldn't. The wound ran too deep, and the trust we once had felt irreparable. "We can try counseling," she said suddenly, her voice frantic, reaching for anything that might save us. "We can fix this." "Can we?" I said, staring at her. The doubt in my voice seemed to drain the last bit of hope from her eyes. The kids' laughter from upstairs echoed down the stairs, a cruel reminder of what was at stake. My chest ached with the weight of the choice before me. I stood up, not trusting myself to speak further, and turned away. The next days were a haze of polite conversations, shared silences, and moments stolen to avoid looking each other in the eye. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to touch the raw edges of the truth that had cut us so deeply. Even the kids noticed, their questions innocent and probing. "Why do you and Mommy seem sad?" Emma had asked one evening, her wide eyes full of concern. "We're just tired, sweetheart," Lucy had said, her smile brittle. The lie hung between us like smoke, suffocating. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I sat in my office, staring at an empty page on my laptop, unable to concentrate on work. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Lucy stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Can we go for a walk?" she asked. There was something final in her voice, something resigned. I nodded, pushing myself up with a sigh. We walked in silence down the familiar path behind our house, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. The air was sharp, filled with the scent of damp earth and approaching winter. "I've been thinking a lot," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost lost in the rustle of the wind. "About us. About what I did. And I realized. I hurt you in a way that can't be fixed." "Lucy," I began, but she shook her head, stopping me. "No, let me finish," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't know how to go back to what we had, Mark. And maybe we can't. Maybe trying will only hurt us more." I swallowed, the knot in my throat tightening painfully. "So what are you saying?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "I'm saying that maybe the best thing we can do for each other, for the kids, is to let go before we destroy everything we've built." The weight of her words settled over us, and for a moment, all I could hear was the wind and the soft rustle of leaves falling around us. I wanted to argue, to fight for the life we had built, but deep down, I knew she was right. The trust had been shattered, and no matter how hard we tried to piece it back together, the fractures would always remain. When we walked back to the house, the decision sat between us, unspoken but understood. That night, as I lay awake listening to her soft, uneven breathing beside me for the last time, I felt a grief that was deeper than anything I'd known. The following morning, we told the kids. They cried, their confusion cutting through me like a knife. Emma clung to Lucy, while Daniel sat, silent and stunned. Lucy held them tightly, whispering reassurances that neither of us fully believed. We separated quietly, with no dramatic farewells or fights. Just a slow, painful unwinding of a life we once shared, until it was just memories we'd pack away and keep in a place we'd only visit in silence. One evening, months later, as I stood outside the house we once called home, I watched through the window as Lucy laughed at something Emma said. The sound didn't reach me, but the sight of her smile, genuine for the first time in so long, twisted in my chest. The wind whispered around me, carrying the scent of rain and the quiet echo of what we had lost. I turned away, walking into the night, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, the cold biting at my skin. A life left behind, an unexpected end to a story that began with promises whispered in the dark. And as the rain started to fall, mingling with the tears I could no longer hold back, I let myself mourn.